Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we've got a really fun one. We have got a single brewer, single style, but two different beers. Both beers sourced from Tavour. So it's a brewer we've done some from in the past. All have been very enjoyable, so I'm looking forward to see what these are about. And today we are visiting Weldworks Brewing. The very first beer we've got is called Kid in a Candy Store. This is a milk stout. It clocks in at 7.5% ABV. This one's been brewed with peanuts, caramel, milk chocolate, nougat, and lactose, as it is a milk stout. They are based in Greeley, Colorado. Beer number two, the exact same style. It's a milk stout. This one's called Starry Night. Same exact ABV at 7.5%. And this one's been brewed with hazelnut, toasted coconut, milk chocolate, and lactose. So two kind of, based on the ingredients list, seems like maybe they're going for mimicking in beer form a couple different candy bars that are pretty famous. Yeah, I'm very excited to jump in here. I love a good milk stout, and Weldworks, everything I've had has been great thus far. So we're going to get things kicking off to see how strong their flavored milk stout game is. Starting with Kid in a Candy Store. This one clocks in, as they both do, at 7.5% ABV. Okay, so jumping right into the first beer of today's Weldworks Brewing's Milk Stout review, we've got Kid in a Candy Store. This one's brewed with peanuts, caramel, milk chocolate, nougat, and lactose. Clocks in at 7.5% ABV. They are based in Greeley, Colorado. So first thing first, in terms of label art, they did a really good job of kind of capturing the essence of the beer name here. It does have very bright and confection-like colors all over it, including some candy in its wrappers and on its various sticks. But that's about the extent of the label art. It looks quite nice. I'm a fan of the design, so without further ado, we're going to get this cracked and poured right in this glass. Now, I am just using my all-purpose, works well for all styles Sam Adams glass. Nice tulip shape, so this will not hold the whole beer, but it will do certain justice to a milk stout. All right, looks pretty thick, quite dark. Gonna give it some agitation here. All right, looks like that formed a decent enough head. Oh, I can smell it from here. It's very pungent. It smells very sweet. Visually, this is very, very black. It's almost pitch black. It's almost pitch black. This is not an imperial. It's an impressively deep color. So I expect some nice, rich, roasty malt undertones there. Head formed okay. You know, it's pretty effervescent, so we'll see how long that sticks around. But let's get right over for a deeper sniff. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That smells fantastic. You can really, really smell the peanuts coming off of this beer. Quite pronounced peanuts. That's really the main aroma that's coming through. You can't pick up a little bit of the chocolate. I can't really detect the caramel, but I expect it's going to come through in the flavor profile. And same thing with the nougat. That's not a very pronounced aroma for a food. So I'm not really detecting anything there. But the peanuts in particular, with the chocolate underneath, are coming through quite strongly. And you can smell that slight sweetness from the lactose. So without further ado, let's jump in. Oh, well, that's very nice. Okay. The first thing that you notice when you take a sip of this, start to agitate it around the palate, is that sweetness, that underlying sweetness. As soon as you swallow, the dominant flavor, just as it was, the dominant aroma is that peanut. And that really is the case for quite a few seconds, give or take about 3. And then slowly, the other underlying flavors that they added in do start to come in and play. Notably, you do get a little bit of it's in liquid form, let's call it a ribbon of caramel that shoots through. And you can definitely taste the underlying milk chocolate. And obviously with the lactose, it does help it feel much more like milk chocolate. Now, nougat, it's not a super strong flavor. There's a suggestion of it in this beer, but I wouldn't be able to say, oh, that tastes like the nougat in a candy bar. Not really. It's overwhelmingly peanut with this nice sweetness that pairs and really accentuates the milk side of the milk chocolate. And just that kind of slight caramel ribbon that comes through. It's very, very nice. I'm going to jump in for body and mouthfeel. Think on these flavors a bit more. The body on this beer is pretty large. It's quite a bit heftier than you would expect for this ABV range. Maybe not for the style though. It's a solid medium heavy, right on the border, which has real presence. In terms of the mouthfeel, it definitely is a viscous beer. It's got a lot of resistance to it, and you can still feel the carbonation as it sits on the palate. It gets a little bit of a sense of greater thickness if you agitate around the palate, but it doesn't get what I would call silky or creamy. But overall, very nice body, very nice mouthfeel, and the two go well together. Both of them feel appropriate in how they pair. In terms of the balance of this beer, like I mentioned, nougat is not an ingredient that is particularly pungent in terms of aroma, and mixed in something like this, I kind of suspected it might get lost, and it does a little bit in this. I mean, there's a suggestion of this lighter nougaty side to it, and it almost takes on a marshmallow-like quality in this beer. I wouldn't say it tastes like nougat does in a candy bar. It tastes more like a marshmallow kind of slight sense in the background, and it's very, very subtle. The caramel as well, it's not super pronounced, but it does come through. Overwhelmingly, the dominant flavor is the peanuts, and then the chocolate is secondary. And then there's, of course, this underlying sweetness from that lactose. It's very nice. It does put one in mind of a candy bar, to be certain. And I enjoy it. Very nice beer. While I personally probably would tweak the balance a little bit, maybe use a little more nougat and dial the peanuts back to just help it balance, what I am tasting is very, very enjoyable indeed. I'm going to jump in for final thoughts on flavor and the finish. Peanuts are just so bold. Then the chocolate, and a few seconds later that caramel does come through, and they blend a little bit, but this entire time the peanuts are the dominant factor with the chocolate just below it. It's at around the 6-7 second after you swallow mark that nougat does come into play, and it is subtle and it's easy to miss, but if you're thinking about what you're tasting and for all these flavors that pop in and out, you'll detect it. It's definitely there. It's quite nice, very nice beer. In terms of the length of the finish, you know, stouts in general, and certainly milk stouts are no exception, they can kind of run the gamut in terms of length of finish. Overall, this one has a bit of a longer finish than your average milk stout, and the dominant factor pushing that is that pungent peanut flavor, which is very enjoyable. I absolutely love peanuts, and it really comes through clearly in this. Another thing that's slightly different than your average milk stout is there's a little bit of a dryness. So there's kind of a slight dry stout quality to the back of it. And that's not something you often get in a milk stout, but it is present here. Overall, a very nice beer, very enjoyable. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, count my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review, and that is Starry Night, the milk stout brewed with hazelnut, toasted coconut, milk chocolate, and lactose, and that one clocks in as well at 7.5% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's Weldworks Brewing Company's milk stout review, we have got Starry Night. This one again clocks in at 7.5% ABV, just as the first did. And this one's been brewed with hazelnut, toasted coconut, milk chocolate, and lactose. In terms of label art, this one has a pretty basic label art comparative to the last, but it still looks quite nice. It's got kind of a Starry Night theme. In fact, kind of the shape and general vibe I'm getting from it is they're being inspired by Van Gogh's Starry Night. It's got some of those kind of swirly kind of patterns moving in there, but it looks very cool. So that's about the extent of the label art. Let's get this one cracked gently. All right. And poured right in the glass. Oh yeah. Another very dark, very thick. This one's also quite effervescent. I'm going to give a little more agitation here for head creation. I'm going to back off again. Just going to get that off the edge of the can before it drips down. All right, so in terms of color, this one is pretty much identical to the last. It's almost pitch black, and it's not an imperial, so it's very impressive. This one did form quite a bit thicker, creamier head than the last one did. It looks quite nice in terms of creation. I still got a little drip down the can. I tried. But yeah, it looks quite nice. In terms of aroma, noticeably, this one you cannot smell from the same distances away as I could the last. So I'm going to have to get up on this one to give it a sniff. Oh, it smells very nice though. You can hands down smell that hazelnut. There's a little hint of sweetness, though not as pungent on the first beer, but you can smell the hazelnut quite clearly, and the toasted coconut. A little bit of a chocolate undertone, but it's blending with the lactose. And that blending is making its kind of milk chocolate side really stick out. So, you know, the lighter, sweeter. So it smells quite nice. The main star ingredients are really coming through clearly. So head's holding true. Let's jump right in and give this one a sip. Oh, that's delicious. Yeah, it's another really, really good beer. I'll tell you, that hazelnut and toasted coconut is a really fantastic combination. And it's got that milk chocolate underneath. It really, really tastes spectacular. Honestly, I'm a massive fan of hazelnut. It's a really good nut choice to go in a beer. It really works well. There's nothing quite like a hazelnut in a beer. It just tends to pair well with malt bills. That's what it does. I've had quite a few different hazelnut beers, and they've all been spectacular. And coconut, that for my money is a very challenging ingredient with which to brew, and I've never brewed with it myself, but I'm basing this on my beer drinking experience. I've had a lot of different beers that have coconut in it, and for my money, it seems to be a challenging ingredient. It can produce some off flavors, some skunky, funky off flavors if it's not done properly. And I do think part of it has to do with, do you leave it raw coconut? Do you toast the coconut? How deeply do you toast it? And are you adding it in the front side of the boil, the middle, the back end? Are you basically throwing it after the boil is complete like you would dry hop a beer? All of this plays a part. And I tell you, they got it exactly right. And really, the hazelnut for sure is the dominant flavor. I'd say it's about 2/3 of the overall flavor profile. Toasted coconut makes up the bulk of that bottom third with just that suggestion of chocolate. The chocolate's very mild. It's very mellow. It's very much blending with that slight sweetness in the background, but this is very hazelnut forward, and then that toasted coconut behind, and those two ingredients just pair beautifully in this beer, especially in this deep, rich malt bill. Sure, it's got lactose added, so it is sweet. But it's not over the top. Neither beer was over the top in terms of sweetness. It was enough to say, yeah, that's a milk stout, but it wasn't astringently sweet. I've had some, and it can be a bit much. This is beautifully balanced. I'm going to jump in for body and mouthfeel, explore this flavor development again. Body on this one doesn't feel quite as robust as on the first. It's a solid medium, but it's not on the border between medium, medium, heavy. It's like smack in the middle medium, which really for the ABV at 7.5, that's exactly where I would expect it to be. In terms of the mouthfeel, the resistance level and viscosity level on the mouthfeel on this one is actually maybe even just a little bit more than on the last beer. So there's not quite the same parity between body and mouthfeel, but frankly, I like it. I like it a lot. It gives a little more play to the breadth of the beer, which I really like. And 7.5, that's not a super high ABV, but it's not low by any stretch of the imagination. But I like the way that the body and the mouthfeel kind of work together, and it really feels like the beer has substance to it. And again, unlike the first beer, this one I did note when I agitate it around the palate, it gets ridiculously creamy, ridiculously creamy. Very, very much more thickened than even just the flat mouthfeel. It gets very, very creamy and thick indeed. Very nice beer. In terms of how this finishes, it's long again, and really it's the hazelnut is the dominant lingering on the back of the palate, with undercurrents of toasted coconut. By the end stages, all hints of the chocolate are out of the way, and there's not really any lingering sweetness. It's just roasted toasted coconut and hazelnut, and it's very, very nice. It's such a bold, pungent flavor, but it's just so well balanced. Like, everything about this beer is exceptionally well balanced. I am a very, very big believer that the balance is arguably the single most crucial part of the entire beer making experience, other than skunking your beer when you're making it. If you can create a balanced beer that lets all of the ingredients speak, they're not vying for attention, and there's not an intensity disparity, it really creates a harmonious beer drinking experience, a very clean drinking experience, and this is exactly that. This is just delicious. I'm going to jump in for one more sip for final thoughts here. It's just so good. It really is tasty. It really is tasty. It puts a smile on your face. A slight sweetness and then immediate, bam, hazelnut, bam, toasted coconut. And that chocolate pairing with that sweetness underneath. And it's just so big. It's such big flavors. And they're just so impeccably balanced. I can't overstate how pleased I am with the balance of this beer. It would be so easy to have it out of whack. Hazelnut's a great ingredient. You don't get it in a ton of beers. They're out there. I've had some, and they're all fantastic. Every one I've ever had with hazelnut in it has been a very well done beer. This is no exception. Coconut, though, I'm really pleased with their use of the coconut. There's no funky, off, bizarre flavors. It just tastes right. This is yet another just spectacularly well done milk stout by Weldworks. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with Weldworks Kid in a Candy Store. They are both milk stouts, both clock in at 7.5% ABV. Weldworks is based in Greeley, Colorado, and this specific one was brewed with peanuts, caramel, milk chocolate, nougat, and lactose, of course, as it's a milk stout. So starting with the aroma on this one was really quite impressive, particularly for a milk stout. You know, sometimes you can smell some, but normally it's in the imperial range where the aromas are just going to whack you in the face, but this was one you could smell from a good foot and a half away, easily. 10 out of 10. For the taste. Taste on this was very enjoyable. Overall, I really did like the beer, and I have an idea of what candy bar they're going for here. And it was a pretty good representation in beer form. Really, the only criticism that I had on the flavor was maybe a little different balance of the ingredients. The peanuts came through very heavily. I would have liked a little more caramel for sure. And definitely the nougat. The nougat, really the only hint of that I picked up tasted more like marshmallow than nougat, but it was still enjoyable. Above average, it gets a 7 out of 10. For the body on this beer was absolutely huge. A 7.5, that's not a low ABV, but it's not a super high ABV. It's not an imperial, and this thing had real presence, real breadth to it. It gets a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same story. Massively viscous, massively thick, tons of resistance, perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was quite a bit longer than I anticipated. Milk stouts can kind of go all over the board, really, in terms of the length of their finish. Stouts, as a rule, don't have the longest finish, but when you add that lactose and other ingredients in there, they tend to kind of get amplified, and that certainly happened in this beer. It was very, very top tier. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one, you know, it's a stout poured at home. It is what it is. It did average. It gets a 5 out of 10. For the appearance, while this was not an imperial, the depth of how dark and black it was almost in that territory. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance, I alluded to this when I was talking about the taste, and the balance, same thing here, really. Just a little different balance between the ingredients. I liked all of them, and yes, you could get them all, but I think maybe dial the peanuts back a bit. It's a very pungent flavor. Elevate the caramel. The milk chocolate was fine, and it paired well with the malt bill, and definitely more nougat. I was really just craving getting that ribbon of nougat coming through as well, but overall above average. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I thoroughly enjoyed this beer. Milk stouts are always a treat. It's always fun to try a new one and see what inventive kind of ingredients people can come up with in their milk stouts. And this was a really good one. It did a good job of capturing the essence of a very well-known candy bar. I thought it was above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. Overall, very, very strong beer here. Very good milk stout. And I liked what it brought to the table. Just a few minor tweaks in a few categories would have pushed it in further into top tier status. As it stands, it gets an 8 out of 10, which brings the total score on Weldworks Brewing's Kid in a Candy Store to an 83 out of 100. So well above average. And if you're a fan of milk stouts and like the ingredient list, this is definitely one to seek. It's a unique and enjoyable beer drinking experience. Moving on to beer number 2. This is their Starry Night, same ABV, 7.5. This one was brewed with hazelnut, toasted coconut, milk chocolate, and lactose. Starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was fine. It was above average, but it was nowhere near the pungency of the first one. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the taste, I absolutely loved the taste of this beer. They leaned heavily on the hazelnut, and hazelnut just pairs so great in beers. Every beer I've ever had brewed with hazelnut has just been outstanding, and this was no exception. And sure, maybe the balance of flavors was a little skewed, but frankly, letting the hazelnut lead and everything else kind of play behind it, I could still taste every independent ingredient, and it was just an absolute pleasure. I gave it top marks, 10 out of 10. For the body, this was just like the first. Far more robust than anticipated. It gets a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same story. It matched the body and it was huge, thick, viscous. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this one, just as the first beer, obviously same brewer, same style, same ABV, just different additives. You know, they're using the same base bill here, just with different additives and different amounts. There was a lot about this that was similar to the first. Finish is no exception. Very, very long. Very top tier. It gets a 9 out of 10. Head and retention. This one did quite a bit better job, and it is a little bit luck of the draw. Cleanliness of the glassware, how aggressively you pour the beer, where and when in the process you tilt. There's a lot that can go into getting a stellar head poured at home that sticks around versus, you know, having it off of a keg from a bar. But this did a great job at home. Above average for sure. It gets an 8 out of 10. Appearance-wise, just as with the first, they were nearly indistinguishable. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance. Now, I did state on the flavor that maybe it wasn't equivalent in all of the ingredients, but frankly, the balance that they did put in there absolutely worked. I thought that letting the hazelnut lead was a very smart idea, and I was so pleased that the toasted coconut in this did not give any off or funky flavors, and it came through perfectly clearly, as did that milk chocolate that paired with that roasty malt bill. I got to enjoy all of their additive ingredients, and they all came through. I loved it. I thought the balance was exceptional. It gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. Subjectively, I absolutely loved this one. Milk stouts kind of all over the board. This was a really, really good one in my opinion. Gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. This beer only lost a handful of points in a few categories, but it was just such a great example of how to construct a milk stout, let everything come through and be harmonious, and just ideas for ingredients that really work well together, and they absolutely nailed it. I give it a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Weldworks Brewing Starry Night to a 94 out of 100. So all total, we are looking at an 11-point spread, an 83 and a 94, but these are both well above average. And if you like the ingredients in either of these and you're a fan of milk stouts, honestly, you can't go wrong with either. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you want to stay in the loop on our videos go live to YouTube, you can click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.